With that, I will hand things over to Sophie. Thank you.
Hi everyone. As Dan said, my name is Sophie and I'm an HTL board member. We're all excited to have you here. I'm really excited for the talk tonight. I'm going to start out with a land acknowledgement. So it is with gratitude and humility that we acknowledge that we are learning, speaking, and gathering on the ancestral homelands of the Mohican people, who are the indigenous peoples of this land. Despite tremendous hardship in being forced from here, today their community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Munsee community. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors, past and present, as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. And now I'm going to just give a very brief introduction for our wonderful speaker tonight. Kara Benson is a writer and a writing mentor dedicated to the well-being of the planet. Her work has been published in the New York Times, Boston Review, Orion, the Brooklyn Rail, and selected for Best American Poetry. Very impressive. She has received a New York Foundation for Arts Fellowship and wrote a series on walking in the woods during the pandemic for Best American Poetry website. Currently, Kara is working on a memoir about love, loss, and commitment in the climate crisis. She lives in a former church on the Rensselaer Plateau in the ancestral homelands of the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohicans. And she is also a multi-time 46er in multiple seasons. I know this, I've hiked with her, and she's very impressive. So yeah, with that, I'll hand it over to her for her talk.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, Dan. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to be here with you all in this space here. I'm I want to start off with asking you to close your eyes if you're comfortable. If not, that's fine. And think of a place that you love, what we might call a natural place. There might be trees, or maybe it's a clearing. Maybe you're near a body of water like a pond, or maybe a running creek. It could even be a tree in an urban setting or park. See the sun filtering through the canopy, or filling the field with a golden glow, or glimmering off the surface of the water. Wherever this place is, picture yourself there. Take the time to look around you. Notice what seems still and what might be moving, rustling or swaying or rippling in a light wind. Look down at the ground beneath where you're standing. Think about the worms in the dirt, the tunnels in the earth made by burrowing rodents. Imagine the vast underground networks, interconnections of organic living matter. Now draw your gaze back slowly up to the grasses or the trees or the surface of the water. You notice that maybe there are birds in the air, or maybe on the water there's floating lily pads and fish. See everything in your special place as energy, as life vibrating. Imagine that you can see the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, even the nutrients moving between the cells. It's a grand digestion system, a master synaptic network of which you are a part. Breathe deeply and picture the branches in your lungs transferring oxygen into your bloodstream and taking the waste gas out of your blood in the form of carbon dioxide, and now sending that out into the air around you. Breathe in again. See how your body takes it all in. Exhale and see how it also gives back. Take another deep breath, and when you're ready, come back to the screen. So I'm going to start with my story of coming into relationship with place, specifically the Rensselaer Plateau on which I now live, and of my learning to develop a more intimate relationship with land and its creatures and organisms more generally. My story isn't necessarily unique or doesn't represent anything that many of you maybe don't already think about or do. But what I'm after is that by framing the story through the lens of a personal relationship with place, with all the psychological components that that entails, we can help sustain and maybe even deepen our commitment to the non-human world. I know I need all the emotional, mental, and even spiritual support I can get in this endeavor at a time when that which I love is under attack. You may be the choir, but I hope you'll enjoy my singing anyway. Throughout this talk, I'll invite you into the story to brainstorm with me. I have a lot of questions, not necessarily a lot of answers, just a lot of stories and confessions. And from our group effort, I hope that we'll draw ideas of pathways to offer others who might benefit from getting closer to natural places, as well as to how to more deeply consider and support our own commitments to a healthy relationship with environment. In 2018, I was in an unexpected life situation of having lost my beloved partner suddenly and tragically. We shared a lovely home together that I could not now afford, nor was I sure that staying in the place that had been ours would ultimately serve my healing. Perhaps I needed something new to help me claim this next chapter I was being thrust into in my life. Perhaps I needed a new place. The way forward, though, was not at all clear. I was casting about for where to go. I considered Vermont, Montana, maybe I'd even walk the Continental Divide. Then one night, driving to a friend's up on the Rensselaer Plateau to sleep over her house because I was still struggling to sleep alone at my own, the stars spoke to me. Here is where I needed to be, they seemed to be saying. Here's where my people were, in this county. But more specifically, I felt drawn to live up on the hill, and a path began opening up before me. From there, I started looking on Zillow, as one does, for houses in the towns that comprise the plateau. For some reason, I became fixated on Grafton. Perhaps it was because I'd read Granville Hick's book, Small Town, about living here back in the early 1900s. Or maybe it was the draw of the woods behind another friend's house who lived here. As a longtime hiker, I wanted that for me too, the woods, and especially if they were up at elevation. In fact, one night when my partner was still alive, we went to a different friend's house who lives up on Plank Road. I already knew a ton of people up here. It was like destiny. And that night we were sitting around a bonfire with a bunch of their neighbors, and I was enamored with all the talk of down in Troy or off the hill to describe anywhere that wasn't home. I'd even nudged my partner, John, hoping to entice him into considering living up among these hot, fine hill folk, but he wasn't having it. He'd said, "You're a writer, Kara. You can work even if the roads are bad." And this was true. His commute would have been awful, so I dropped it. But now that I was on my own, I picked up the idea again and was starting to get excited about the possibility of moving up on the hill. But with John gone, my eligibility for home owning was greatly diminished. Between the two of us, I'd had the good credit while he had the steady stream of income. I was a poet, so you can imagine. The Zillow filters for cost and the location of Grafton brought me to exactly one listing, a church on Blue Factory Hill Road. I can't live in a church, I said. That is way too weird. I scrolled past it. I increased my filters. Other options appeared, but I kept going back to that church. I grabbed my snowshoes finally one afternoon and headed to walk the trails at Dyken Pond, which would take me past the church on the way. I drove past it slowly, taking a long, hard look as I turned onto Madonna Lake Road in a burgeoning storm. And then I went out for hours on the trails at Dyken, arguing with myself and getting back to my car in the accumulating snow and just before dark, still arguing with myself. And I drove carefully back the way I'd come, down and up the curved hilly road. And I started imagining, what would it be like to be heading to the church, this church as my home in this storm? When I got to the end of the road, there it was across from me. I pulled into the lot. I stared up at the tall spire with its cross on top as the snow squalled and whirled around it. This was crazy. What was I doing in a parking lot of a church on a hill in a storm, thinking I might move here? As the dark deepened, an industrial fluorescent buzzing outdoor light blinkered on. Oh, that will have to go. With that, it seemed my decision was made. But I was nervous about it. Purchasing a home, let alone a church, all on my own, of going through the rigmarole that is the real estate market. With only me to choose, I was afraid of making a mistake. I had no one to bounce this off. Well, I had a lot of friends to bounce it off, but I didn't have my partner. So I started to investigate more deeply the situation. I began asking around, even at one point heading the other way off the hill to the little library. What did they know about the church? They didn't have a lot of history about it, but they knew it was for sale. And Granville Hicks's book was displayed prominently, so I took that as a good sign. I looked at tax maps. Who owned the woods surrounding the lot, and would they stay forest? That concerned me, so I called the executive director of the Rensselaer Plateau Alliance. You may have heard of him, Jim Bonesteel, and would they be willing to buy that land to conserve it? Jim, of course, took the call. He was happy to talk with me about the possibility and said if I did move to the plateau to stay in touch, which obviously I have. Already I was forming a more informed relationship with the place before even making an offer on it. And after a protracted purchasing process, which included going before the planning board, negotiating for the cross to be removed, testing the leach field for residential capacity, during which I walked the land with a contracted professional, watching for water to bubble up, imagining how my waste would intermingle with the growth and the critters that fed off of it, I moved in. Okay, now there it is. And there's that fluorescent light. You can see it looks really lovely in this picture. It was not so lovely in real life. That light's gone now. I'd long dreamed of being able to walk out my back door and go hiking or snowshoeing in the woods. As much research as I'd done on the church, and even as I'd walked connected wooded parcels down the hill behind it with one of my friends who lived locally, I had no idea what I would have access to out the back door of my new home. After settling in and all the focusing on the interior that entails, I began exploring outside, around the property and beyond. One day, a neighbor I'd met when I was pounding my new mailbox post in, and she and her husband were walking up the hill past my house, both HTL members, I'll note, came walking by again while I was out front. She asked if I wanted to join her to walk Old Back Road. I didn't know what that meant, but I immediately said yes. We walked our paved road before turning onto a dirt road that ran behind my house down the hill, and we made the half loop, as she called it, cutting up into the woods at what seemed like some random spot, but she knew really well, to follow a stone wall. Of course, there was a stone wall, up through forest, when lo, there through the trees was my home, the spire pointing skyward coming into view. When we got to my place, she drew a little map to get to a pond she'd mentioned. She said it was across the dirt road at the gate. I did not remember the gate. And then just bear right when I came to the first clearing and turned down past the baby white pines. I wasn't sure I'd find the pond from this, but held on to the little map anyway. It wasn't until that winter that I set out behind the church, this time on my own. A good and proper storm had dumped over a foot onto the hill. This photo is not from that walk, but I wanted you to get the idea. I grabbed my snowshoes and headed out my back door and down along the stone wall I'd walked up with my neighbor. I'd done enough bushwhacking to have a certain level of comfort, striking out without a specific destination. Plus, my tracks would guide me home. The snow had stopped and the wind was low, so I wasn't worried about them getting filled in. The snow was deep and heavy clumps dropped onto me from above. Animal tracks were everywhere, crisscrossing the land like a backcountry version of Grand Central. I got down to the back road and there was the gate. I'd found it. I crossed over past the gate and trudged down a slope and back up to what had to be the clearing my neighbor had mentioned. At this point, in such deep snow and having done some meandering, and now the dark was coming, I knew it was time to turn back up toward home. I remember picking out landmarks, aiming uphill to trek between two blocky boulders as signposts. I knew right then that I would use again and again. As I worked uphill in deep snow, aiming to snowshoe between these two boulders, knowing that these standing stones would accompany me on future walks, I already felt them to be friends. I knew that they would keep me company and guide me. I didn't know what type of rock they were. I confess that though I had been a rugged, and some would say aggressive hiker for years, I got to the hill with all but basic proficiency in flora and fauna and other knowledge of the natural world. But these rocks, I knew their presence. These stones, I would now recognize as my friends and greet them on each passing. On my next trek, now familiar with how to get to the clearing, I ventured farther. I bared right past the cluster of baby white pines as the map had indicated. This is the actual clearing, and headed down the hill. I should also confess, all good stories are confessions, that to get to the gate, actually to walk on all of this land, I was trespassing. Though some might say that we are all of us trespassers, with the exception of indigenous people, here in these ancestral homelands of the Stockbridge, Munsee Band of Mohicans, as our land acknowledgement tips a hat to. As understanding this history has become another part of my developing a relationship with this place, as much as walking its herd paths, learning its dips and bogs, discovering where the fox seem to always leave their fragrant skunk-smelling urine, or where the red cardinal flowers explode in August. But I'm getting ahead of myself, back to crossing property lines without permission. Although I now have permission from all of them, by the way, just saying. Somehow in the snow, I convinced myself there was a buffer from the trespass, as much as I left my trace all the more visible, but that I was not officially walking on the land, but on the snow on top of it, nor was I doing any damage to the understory, which begs, for me, an interesting question and one that'll stop here for us to ponder together. What do you consider the land to be? I'm open. What do you guys, how would you define the land? What comprises land? You can raise your hand, you can unmute, you can type into chat.
Hey there.
Hi, Peter.
So we think land is an ecosystem. It includes the air, it includes the soil, it includes the rocks, it includes the living things. It's a system, and it also includes us.
Nice.
There you are.
And it's a living, breathing entity unto itself.
That was Ellen over here.
Yeah, yeah. Hi.
Yeah, that didn't sound like you, Peter. Thanks. Anybody else?
Yeah, hey, it's Julie.
Hi, Julie.
Yeah, that's a much lovelier answer than the one that I immediately went to legal ownership of land. So like how it's defined in the law, which, varies place to place.
And I see in chat something greater than me and us from Mike and Maddie. Land is the structure in which all terrestrial beings interact and thanks to gravity. Nice. Any other? I have always thought of land as something that holds all of us up in support, something that grounds us. Lovely. Land is where our soul gravitates to. Ooh, good one. I mean, they're all good. I don't mean to do a value judgment. Someone's named me besides me. How is that possible?
And that's okay. It's Brenda. So if I don't know why, and I didn't put my name there, but anyway, these are all great answers. And what I was thinking also, Kara, was because I was gonna say some of those, but I don't know, it also has some kind of spirit and aura to it, which is something that like really makes me want to connect with the nature. So I find the land is just, and it feeds me. I don't feel a lot of blocks, if that helps.
Totally. Lovely. Okay, so I'm gonna bring us back to, so this is Wikipedia. Land is commonly defined as the solid, dry surface of Earth. It can also refer to the collective natural resources that the land holds, including rivers, lakes, and the biosphere. Human manipulation of the land, including agriculture and architecture, can also be considered part of land. Land is formed from the continental crust, the layer of rock on which soil, groundwater, and human and animal activity sits, which doesn't seem to tell the whole story from what I'm hearing from you guys. Here's some other,
Tara, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it looks like
Yeah.
we're seeing some sort of speaker view now where we're seeing both the current slide and the next slide.
okay. Pardon me.
Just something to
Bear
change
with me one moment.
with the screen
I
share.
appreciate you telling me. I don't know what that, okay. So now that's good for me to know because in case I do that again. Okay. Bear with me one moment. And we went through all this tech ahead of time. Okay. Okay, I know it looks like we're back at the beginning, but we're not gonna stay there. I'm gonna just zip, 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 zip. Okay, is that good?
Perfect.
Right on, thanks. So some of the more cultural or symbolic associations that we heard in some of the answers: resource, nation state, countryside, ground beneath our feet, property, home, something to get back to, mother, and open space. And I think I wanted to have us meditate a little bit on land because I think thinking about the other in this relationship um, and how we define it is important in thinking about the relationship itself. Okay, so back to my story. So I was making my way down the paths past the clearing. This was still the trespassing trek where I was snowshoeing on top of the snow and actually on the land, right? Although obviously our answers would seem to indicate that all of it, including me, so I couldn't be trespassing. I know some lawyers here, so they might say otherwise. And so I kept heading down, down, down as if drawn by the body of water at the bottom of this valley between the ridges on the hill. And I came upon the most magnificent setting, that which is before you, the pond my neighbors had spoken of. Here, within walking distance from my back door, was this amazing interconnected ecosystem: water and marsh, rock and pines, and who knew how many creatures were making a home here. For that matter, how many had been along my entire walk. I knew I wanted to know more, that as I've written elsewhere, I was a proverbial Mr. Magoo walking nearly blind through the world here, sure that many creatures had had their eyes on me, and that intricate patterns and interactions between flora and fauna were occurring, and that so many of the details, the particulars of this place, were completely unknown to me, even as I was becoming more familiar with them, more intimate. It's sort of like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. The closer I got, the more detailed it became, and the more aware I became of not fully knowing those details. And I wanted to know more, and I think that this is a key component of relationship: desire. A desire to understand, to see, to pay attention to learn the other, whether that other is a spouse or a wetland or a particular one-legged black-capped chickadee. A quick digression here. There's a one at my home, a one-legged black-capped chickadee who's been feeding out of my hand this winter. The first time I saw her, I wasn't sure what I saw. Wait, did that chickadee just have one leg? The next day, as they all fluttered around me as they do when I went out to fill the feeder, sure enough, there she was, a bird who had landed on top of this shepherd's staff who had just one leg. Now, I don't know for sure if it's a he or a she. You can't really tell with black-capped chickadees, I have come to learn. It's more through their behavior that you might notice, their courting behavior, which is not happening at the moment that I noticed. But there she was. I'm going to call her a she. The miracle of her survival. I often fill my cupped hand with seed and hold it out for all of the chickadees to hop onto from the staff and snatch a choice nut or seed and then fly off. But I've noticed it's easier for her if she doesn't have to make the leap onto my hand. She seems to prefer it if I bring my hand up to her where she's standing on the staff and will dip forward for a peanut when the food is close enough. Sometimes this scares the others off, but she and I are learning each other. Sometimes I call her Tippy. Though that was a digression, isn't that part of how we form a relationship, right? How we get to know the other in bits and pieces, moving back and forward in time, learning some of their history, learning this part about them, another part about them, supplementing here and there with other types of information. In other words, relationship may be nonlinear, just like this talk. It's a process. Which leads me to talk about how in my process of developing a relationship with this place, with supporting my learning of the other, and something that I think we can use as a takeaway is that there are many ways of getting close to nature. Back to the two rocks that became my guides, my friends. That's not the rock in this picture, but this one's my friend too. And it's the one that I had a picture of. My two friends back behind my house told me they wanted to remain anonymous, so I'm not sharing a picture of them. I didn't know then, and I'm still not quite sure now, but I'm guessing that they were possibly gray wacky rock, or that the plateau, I didn't know either that the plateau is largely comprised of that variety of sandstone, gray wacky sandstone, which Wikipedia calls a poorly sorted one, and also texturally immature, which I find endearing actually. But I felt and feel close to them, even though I didn't know what kind of rock they were. And from that closeness, I can learn more. Writer and thinker Gavin Van Horn has said that while anthropomorphization, like the kind I exhibit in calling these rocks my friends, can be used to limit the world, to make everything like us, but it can also be a beautiful entry point. Well, those are my words, but he would echo those, because we can see that there are parallel characteristics between the human and what he calls the more than human world. That this feeling of identification with the more than human by relating to aspects of it or they as familiar can be an antidote to the over-mechanization or hyper-rationalization of the world that perhaps contributes to a perceived divide between humans and other species, and I would even say all of nature generally. There's more to say about humans and nature, and we'll get there, but while I'm on the rocks, on the possibility of my friends being gray wacky, I want to think about names and how naming is another part of forming, revealing, and fostering relationship. Gray wacky apparently stems from Dutch miners, wacky meaning dirty gravel and gray for the color. So it was named at least in part because of what was observed about the rock. As another case study, I want to look at the name of a different body in our area, not this one. I didn't want to put roses up because there weren't any roses in the wild behind back in the woods. So these are red cardinal flowers. And so it's my, a rose is a rose is a rose, a red cardinal is a red cardinal is a red cardinal. As another case study, I want to look at the name of a different body in our area, the major river nearby. We know it as the Hudson River, so named after Henry Hudson, an English explorer who ventured out with the support of English and Dutch merchants looking for new routes and markets. The native peoples who were living in the region knew the river by a different name, the the river that flows both ways. The river is a tidal river, as you may know, so the name reflected the place itself. The indigenous people here called themselves the Taconic, the people of the waters that are never still, which are now who we know as the Mohicans. And I was wondering, what does this, I'm not gonna pause screen sharing because that was a little bit of a cluster last time, but I'm wondering, what does this, you can still unmute and share. What does this signify to you? The difference between naming a place after a person and naming a people's after a place. What is the difference? What type of relationship does this indicate to you?
Well, I think it's a lot more respectful to name a place after maybe the people that had lived there, not the people, maybe the original people, but also even some of the plants, and defining the ecology of the place. It seems a little proprietary if it's like mountains named after the person who supposedly first climbed them. That always irritates me. It's like
Me too.
changing Denali to Mount McKinley, for example, back to that
Ugh.
name. Like, okay, I think I'll stop there.
Yeah.
Just to be on the safe side.
Yeah. And I'm seeing a difference in humility, dominion over a place versus being part of the place, somewhat spiritual. Absolutely. Yeah.
I also think
Yeah.
that there's a ability to have a name for what the place is, like a river, an East Coast river, an ocean, like in a descriptor of what it is. And then at times the names seem like a historical imprint of who's been there. So that's just I'm a natural resource steward, and so I think about a lot of times like the name of it has a function for me. Like I live on a tidal river that's brackish, so when I think about it, I think about what that name is. It's very literal as to what it is and its function. And then it's called the Piscataqua, which is the name. I don't know if before the Native Americans were here, if there was another name for it even prior to that. But to me, it then gives that history of who's touched it and who's been on it and who's interacted with it.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Moon. I think Maddie says, I think names about a place or how a land was used can offer insight for the future as well. Even if the original use is lost, we can still understand the river that flows both ways rather than some dead guy who quote unquote found it. Maddie, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. Um, uh, So the name indicates relationship, right? What kind of, I think the name indicates what kind of relationship we're having with place, whether we are observing, like, well, let me say, like observing the qualities of the place. And so therefore naming them in a way that is more connected to who or what, if you will, the thing actually is than naming it after some dead guy. That proprietary relationship. So thanks everybody for joining in. I learned of these names while researching the peopled history of the area, part of my developing a relationship with the Rensselaer Plateau, named after Kilian von Rensselaer, the Dutch diamond and pearl merchant who gained control of the land from the Mohicans, the Mohicana. I personally feel happiest just calling it the hill myself. Sometimes I say the mountain that is my home. So back to the mountain and its creatures. I wanted to know more about these more than human neighbors. I started not only observing more closely for surprise cameos like this red fox behind my home in the snow, but I signed up for all sorts of walks and talks on mammal tracking, wildflower identification, reading the forested landscape, and mushrooms, many of these through this very land trust. One of the key elements to learning to track, a tracker I studied with said, was putting in hours on the ground. And that's another component of developing a relationship with place, being present to it over time. I've walked with this particular tracker more than a dozen times, taking notes, dropping down on my knees to get my snout perilously close to scat, pulling out a ruler to measure tracks, being stumped, humbled, and overzealous in my identifying too quickly without letting the story of that which we were looking at reveal itself to me, and generally enjoying the opportunity to connect more specifically to that which was occurring around me all the time. From this investment of my time and attention, I have been rewarded many times over with receiving and perceiving more abundantly the intricate richness of the world, of the varied biodiverse world in which I live. And this receiving indicates a two-way relationship. That is to say that in addition to feeding me, literally providing drinking water, air, and physically sustaining me, the land does in fact feed me emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. As Robin Wall Kimmerer does say, the land loves us back. One day, after spending hours on the ground with this tracker and a group, I came back to my home to see that one of the very creatures we'd been studying that day had been scampering all around my house while I was gone. It's a mink, for those of you following along at home. I picked up its track near my garbage cans and followed the trail into the woods, over the stone wall, back to the church, and around it to my makeshift water barrier. I don't know if you can see here, there's like a plastic slide and some rocks. So that pipe right there was pumping. I had a new sump pump, and the water was pumping out of it and had been flowing back to my house. So I put this plastic down. This is flowing downhill, even though it's going up. I put this plastic down so the water would flow away from the house, and I was going to do something about it in spring. So the mink was scooting all around, and I followed it around, and it came and it got to the top of this plastic. And here's the base of the plastic up here in the next slide. It slid down the plastic and all the way down past the plastic down below. Just like it used my little makeshift water slide as my makeshift barrier as a water slide. I was delighted. I just was like, I couldn't have been happier to see the remnants of such free travel by this mink on the land where I live. What variation and pattern written on the page of terrain that was my home. The original streaming service right in front of me. How it fills me up to share this place, to be immersed in nature. But is it only that I live in the 5th largest contiguous forest in New York State that I'm immersed in nature? Which brings me to another question. What is nature and where is it? So I'm just going to briefly move past this one because we've hit on a lot of these answers with land. You know, Ellen and Peter nailed it immediately. Like, I mean, not that there's any wrong or right answer, but in thinking about what is nature versus what is human, Oxford says the phenomena of the physical world collectively, including plants, animals, the landscape, and other features and products of the earth, as opposed to humans or human creations. And the natural world, the living world, Mother Nature, creation, the world, the environment, the earth, Mother Earth, the universe. So how does the universe not include us, huh? The cosmos, natural forces, wildlife, flora and fauna, countryside, landscape, scenery, the physical force regarded as causing and regulating these. So where do we fit in? Are we a part of it? Let's see, hang on. Oh, I'll just show this. This seems to be here. Apparently I am a part of it. I'm in this stream that was on an HTL walk, and I'm inside this amazing tree. I don't know if you can see. This tree is a 400, has to be 400 or 500-year-old white pine. And I'm down in it, and I'm actually crouching inside it. You can see the sap right here. I would say that we are a part of it. So what is it to be a human? And what does it mean to be a human in relationship with nature? I'm going to, I want to read briefly a story from this book in Native New Yorkers by Evan Pritchard. It's the legacy of the Algonquin people of New York. He's talking about the city more than the upstate area, but uh, there's a story here about the art of being human that I want to share. Algonquin storyteller Ken Littlehawk of the Micmac shares a story that intimates how hard it is to be a, quote, real human being in this world and how important it is to try. A young half-blooded Indian boy kept asking his full-blooded Indian grandfather, "Teach me to be an Indian, teach me to be an Indian." After some weeks, grandfather finally promised to teach him. He brought the boy to the edge of a beautiful lake. He gave the boy a big stick and said, "See this stick? I want you to take it over to the edge of that lake and stir up the water." The boy did so. Then grandfather instructed the lad to stir up the stones, sand, and even the plants that grew under the water with that stick. The boy, being a boy, was happy to do so. And soon the water was a cloudy mess of leaves and mud and sand whirling around. The boy stepped back to admire his work. After the cloudy water began to clear, grandfather said to the boy, "Now, I want you to put everything back exactly as it was before." The boy sat down and cried, "I cannot do that. It can never be the same. I thought you were going to teach me to be an Indian." "Yes," grandfather answered, "but before you learn what it is to be an Indian, first you must learn what it is to be a human being." The boy was on his way to learning an important lesson. The power to change things that comes with being human must be used responsibly. You cannot simply put things back as they were. I just want to point out here, a human being, especially a person, is distinguished from an animal or in science fiction, an alien. Um, so obviously we're creatures after all, and we interact, we build, we make things just like the beavers. Here's the beaver's home. My church isn't quite like this, but to me, they're both sacred. They can coexist, these houses, we creatures. Oh, and this is where that other immerse yourself slide was supposed to be. There it is. Back to my specific story, or a quick overview of some of the rest of this story of getting to know this place. This has also been as much about getting to know myself in this place, to being conscious of my presence in place, my approach, my desire, my impact, my intervention, my giving and receiving, my resources, energy, excretions, and advocacy. I think reflecting on these questions, on how we are in relationship with land, nature, wildlife, each other, and ourselves, is an important part of discerning what the land might need from us at this crucial time, and how we can best approach our work of being of service to the healing of the stressed natural world, of which we're establishing we are an important part. In addition to what we might call the hard sciences of determining where watersheds lie or possibilities for wildlife corridors, or even in determining social and cultural usage and attachment, I believe this psychological investigation of ourselves and how we approach other is of great value. Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about a velvet rope approach to land conservation, a white savior or liberal guilt approach. Those are my words. That the land is to be saved by certain individuals and to be held apart from general human use, in a version of what philosopher Slavoj Žižek has called our modern day fall from grace, from the garden, the environmentalist version of sin not being of knowledge, but that our human cognitive powers have led us to spoiling the garden, to this human nature divide. That is our sin. And then I think about Paulo Freire's seminal work on pedagogy of the oppressed, that to sit to the table as someone who helps those who are in need of what we might have to offer, in this case, the land and its creatures, whether through conservation or intervention, that we look at ourselves too. How are we approaching this work? How are we approaching our relationship? Relationship always indicates two parties. Sorry. As someone who believes in leave no trace principles when I'm hiking, I confess I had developed a mea culpa approach to my relationship with land and walking on it. Under the thought of leaving no trace, which I still believe in most circumstances, was a belief that my or even our presence was a problem. And now I believe, and I'm working with my conscious relationship with place, like the Ken Littlehawk story. Walking to the pond, I became very conscious of where I was treading. I chose to stick to one route, right next to the stone wall, for as much as I could to minimize my impact. Even there, though, I have created a path in the ground cedar. The ground cedar doesn't grow now where I have been walking, but it is thriving beside my footfalls. And now I see that the path that I have created is being used by deer and fox at minimum, and I am thrilled to no end to be a part of the herd in my foot travel. That this herd path that I initiated is just one stretch of the vast network of them in these woods, and I often pick up on others and follow theirs. I am aware of my impact and I care for it, about it. But I also believe that by being able to tread my path, my own path within nature, on the land, as a human, yes, making a trail ultimately helps me to be a better advocate. That now, in accepting my full self as someone with an impact, helps me to bring my full self to the table, which means my heart as well as my mind. And as I've said, my resources and energy, that I am not coming with shame or false pride, but with a humility, although, please, I come with both many times. It's a constant endeavor, this constant looking at oneself, but with the humility of knowing that the humility of knowing that I have gifts to offer and that they are needed. In my case, it's usually the storyteller, the jester, the spiritual cheerleader. And what does the land need from us? I'm going to pause here and ask for your thoughts on that, whether you want to share them in chat or unmute and share them. What does the land need from us? Oh, I love that, to be treated as an equal. Yep. Respect and conserve and share. Respect. Nice. There's a series of books, recognition of its needs and honoring its past, present, and future. A symbiotic relationship. Lovely. Yeah, there's a series of books called Kinship, considering that is co-edited by Robin Wall Kimmerer, to be viewed as a community that we belong to. Nice. Humility. Lovely. Yeah. Good stewardship. Yep. Love it. And now, what are your gifts to offer in this endeavor? Awareness. Teaching sustainable practices. Go Robert Lewis. Gratitude and compassion. Go Brenda Kara Benson. Education related to our stewardship role. Love Julie Ackerman. Joy in each step. Humility again. Absolutely. These are just bringing the Hippocratic Oath to nature. Maddie. Yeah. What the land needs from us, noticing it and noticing its changes from year to year and season to season. Love it. Thanks, Judy. And so I do want everyone, we're almost coming in for a closing. I do want everyone to think about yourselves. Oh, wait, I see one more. Hold on. And a few more gnomes. Yeah. That's in the Barberville Falls Preserve, or it was anyway. I hope it's still there. I would definitely want to invite everyone to think about like yourselves and what your strengths are and what your particular gifts are, and how they are needed. Everybody has a part to play, and how our own particular parts to play are needed. All of them are needed. Somebody might be a lawyer, somebody might be testing water, somebody might be a storyteller. We're all needed. Back to my home. I love to live in coexistence with my more than human neighbors. I am happy to be a part of this place, and that I am learning better and better all the time how to support this wildlife around me. I know to take my bird feeders in at night in spring and fall when bears are first emerging super hungry or storing up for winter, because the more they get habituated to feeding off people food sources, the more they will be seen as a nuisance, a problem to be eradicated. I plant pollinators and let my grass grow out longer and lengthier to give insect populations a chance to thrive. I let leaves pretty much do what they will, and I'm letting a strip in front rewild itself. It's a grand experiment, and I'm hoping to rewild the whole property. I have bird decals on all of my windows, and I don't turn on outside lights at night, except for when I go away and I have cat sitters coming. These are just some of the things I'm learning to do to be in a more reciprocal relationship with nature right here where I live. One of the first flowers I planted when I moved to the church was a clump of bee balm. To bring this full circle, the bee balm was transplanted, though I left a healthy portion behind, from my previous house down off the hill, the one where I was living at the start of this talk. It was a plant my beloved partner, John, brought to me because he wanted to live among hummingbirds. They visited us there, and when I sit with them now, I feel a relationship with all of creation that reaches across time. This is a relationship based in love. I learned how to love by being in relationship with John, and now I bring that same sense of commitment with all of its risks of loss and grief to the more than human world. That's how I keep showing up in this relationship that I'm still developing with place and all the inhabitants here, and with you all tonight. Thank you all for showing up with me.
Thanks, Kara.
Thank you, Kara.
Thank you, everybody. That's it.
Thank
That's my
you.
talk.
Wonderful job, Kara.
Beautiful.
Thank
Thank
you,
you for
beautiful
inviting us.
people. Thank you for coming. I really, really hope everybody does think about what your own gifts are, and how they, Michelle, you're upside down, and how they can fit, and contribute, and bring them to bear. So that's what I got. If anybody has any comments or questions, I'm here for them.
It was a lovely
Uh,
talk. Thank you. It was
Thank
really-
you, Ellen. You guys were
Thank you,
in it.
Kara.
You're welcome, Mike. Thanks for coming. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, Ellen and Peter, you guys, Ellen, you're the one that walked me to Old Back Road.
Yeah, I don't recall making that map though. It's just completely left my memory. So
Yeah, you did. Stuck
Oh.
with me.
yeah, that was a gorgeous slide of Bernie Pond. Oh, I love it. It's one of my favorite places here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Is your mailbox still standing?
it is. Yeah. So I guess we can wrap here. We can officially end the recording.